Hello and welcome to Press TV's news analysis coming to you from Tehran. I'm Majorie Cohn. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, they have been very precise precision strikes against Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. This is a quote from U.S. President Barack Obama regarding American drone strikes in Pakistan. However, according to a new report that's gathered its information by talking to people on the ground, relatives of witnesses of the drone attacks, the reality is that 74% of those killed have been civilians. Who will be held responsible for the innocent lives lost, and what will it take to stop these attacks? Well, stay with us as we take a look at this story on this news analysis.
Evidence shows that the U.S. government has systematically understated the extent of civilian casualties from drone strikes in Pakistan. This by automatically considering any military-aged male killed in drone attacks as a militant. A new study, however, says civilian casualties accounted for 70% of the death toll over a 3-year period, whereas American figures put that number at 30%. The findings are based on information from the families of victims and local sources concerning strikes on mourners and rescue workers. The new revelations stand in stark contrast to what the U.S. president says. Last year, Barack Obama said U.S. drone strikes are mostly killing militants. For years now, the U.S. has been using its unmanned planes to fire missiles wherever it feels necessary, including in countries that condemn its actions.
I want to make sure that people understand actually drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties. For the most part, they have been very precise precision strikes against Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. And we are very careful.
Thousands of people have been killed in Pakistan by America's pilotless drones. The U.S. uses the drones not only in Pakistan, but also in countries such as Yemen, Afghanistan, and Somalia.
There is a reckless disregard. There is apparently a reckless disregard for international law in Washington. Washington believes that as long as it is safe, its allies are safe, the rest of the world can suffer as much a tragedy as possible.
In 2010, the UN has said the use of drones challenges international law. Pakistan has on many occasions condemned drone strikes on its territory, calling them a violation of its sovereignty. People in Pakistan have gone on mass protests calling on the U.S. to stop its deadly strikes. So far, though, plans to halt drone strikes or to apologize to the families of the victims don't seem to be on Washington's agenda, at least for now.
Well, I'd like to welcome my guest to the program, anti-war activist Ty Berry from Washington, former assistant to the UN Secretary General Dennis Hallyday, and from New York, retired senior Pakistani Air Force officer Sultan Ali from Islamabad. Sorry. Thank you so much for being with us. Well, I'd like to start this off in Washington and with our guest, Ty Berry. Why is it, first of all, let's start from the beginning. Why is the U.S. doing what they're doing? Why are they using these drones to attack these areas to begin with?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. And
thanks for being with us.
I'd just like to remind the people that only until just recently did the United States even admit that they were doing these drone attacks. These drone attacks have been taking place over the last 9 years in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and now they've spread to Somalia and Yemen. The United States uses security as its reason for killing people. As you were stating in the previous run-up to this interview, that the United States is claiming that only 30% of those who are killed in drone attacks are innocent. Well, that's far too many. How many innocent people need to die to protect what is so-called U.S. security? We know that no one in Pakistan, in Waziristan, or in the mountains of Afghanistan are a threat to the United States. And today, the United States is using its War Powers Act that it gained in 2001 under George Bush to kill innocent people in Pakistan, some of whom were not even 9 or 10 years old at the time. and groups like the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula didn't even exist at the time. So the president should need to go back to Congress to get any right to use these weapons. These are weapons of mass destruction in my world. Now, I'd like to also point out that in your run-up, you said that 70% are innocent victims of these drone attacks. Well, I conclude that it might be even higher, but when the CIA is in charge of these drone attacks, we will never know. As far as we know, there's only been up to between 170 and 250 named people that these drones were supposed to assassinate. They are neither precise nor are they victimless.
All right, well, let me turn to Islamabad and get Sultan Ali in on this discussion. In previous reports, it had been said that the majority of those killed are militants. And as our guest has just mentioned again, that, of course, that is not the case. And the U.S. military was using actually a criteria that any male killed would be considered a militant. How could they be allowed to calculate in that way? And can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, sorry, there was some problems with the audio. Why do you think, or how do you think that they're allowed to calculate in that way?
Well, I personally think that this is a very stinted logic, declaring that any able-bodied male is to be considered a militant. It is just like the legal system in France where a person who is accused is considered guilty and he has to prove otherwise. So in this particular case, just because a person is male, he is able-bodied, to be considered a militant, I think it is the most outlandish thing, it is the most unfair thing, and should be challenged by any legal system. In fact, one of the British origin but Pakistani lawyer Akbar has created a case where he has carried out talks and research with the relatives of the victims, and he has found out that the percentage of the innocent peoples, which is labeled so-called as the collateral damage, is much higher than what is being claimed. In fact, John Brennan has recently claimed that in the last 1 year, not a single innocent person has been killed. This is not only preposterous, but it is contrary to any human right justification, and not only the sane people in the United States, but the entire world should condemn this, because Pakistan and especially Waziristan area is not a war zone, and the United States really has no right to carry out these illegal attacks.
Well, speaking of illegal attacks, Dennis Halliday, not only are there illegal attacks, but let's look at the aspect of it being collective punishment. And isn't collective punishment illegal according to international law? And if that is the case, why is there silence from much of the international community?
Well, firstly, collective punishment is often associated with the application of sanctions. Sanctions then punish the entire nation state and its people, although the punishment may be intended for the sovereign or the dictator or the government in power. In the case of Pakistan, this is a total violation of the sovereignty of Pakistan by the United States, which in itself is an extraordinary development and continued development. Secondly, I've just heard that it's been condemned by the United Nations, and I'm very happy to hear that. Thirdly, it's a violation of the Charter and the provisions of the Charter which prohibit nation states attacking each other in this sort of violence. And fourthly, it's a violation of the Geneva Conventions and Protocols, which very specifically preclude the killing of civilians. And I believe we have to assume that the Americans know perfectly well that precision instruments or not, predator drones kill civilians in large numbers. Whether it's 70% or 10%, it's grossly unacceptable. And I would hope the Washington and the United States would cease the use of drones in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and everywhere else in addition.
Well, let me follow up with you, Mr. Halliday, because you just said that it violates several international conventions. However, if there is no pressure by the United Nations on the United States, you've just heard that they have condemned the usage, but will that condemnation actually turn into any type of pressure to force the hand of the United States?
Well, sadly, no, because it seems that the United States has absolutely no respect for the United Nations and its charter and its membership or international law. They have violated, since the invasion of Iraq, for example, by George Bush, and many other different ways, the rules, the regulations, the laws of the United Nations have been broken. And the United States and other permanent members see the United Nations to pursue their own vested interests. Well, this is not, of course, the plan. The plan was that member states would work together to avoid warfare and all sorts of aggression and violence as per the Charter. And sadly, Washington, of course, does not buy into this program.
Oh, turning to Washington, Ty Berry, would you say then that in general it seems that international laws, or certain international laws, are only enforced for some countries, whereas other countries are ignored? And if that is the case, how does that affect the credibility of the United Nations in general?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to make it clear that the United States uses the reasoning that it's in its national security interest to protect itself. Now, under international law, you have to be in clear, imminent danger, like there have to be troops on your border ready to cross in for you to attack a country that's not attacking you. There has to be a clear path to harm to your country by another group of people from another country. Right now, the United States is in clear violation of international law by attacking a country such as Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, that it is not at war with. Now, it can use its drones if it wants to, the United States in Afghanistan, and I guess there's some kind of legality to it. But these other nation states, these sovereign nations, this is a clear violation of international law. It's a war crime and a violation of human rights. Now, the other aspect of this is that the United States is claiming that it is constantly at war with terrorists. Well, these terrorists that they're calling terrorists are, like I said before, were 8 and 9 years old at the time of the 9/11 attacks on the United States. There are groups that weren't even around that they are claiming that they have every right to attack from the 9/11. We need to stop this war on terrorism. We need to end this worldwide dominance by the American military. And another point I'd like to make out is that the CIA is illegal combatants in this case. The United States put people in Guantanamo because of the same actions that the CIA is doing today. They're not a military group. They're not uniformed. They're fighting an illegal covert war, killing innocent people in Pakistan, Yemen, and Somalia. And they should be put on trial. They should be put in a place like Guantanamo.
Okay, well, turning to Islamabad, talking about the United States government, but I want to switch over and talk about your government itself. What about the reaction of the Pakistani government in general to what is going on, the killing of its national? Why aren't we hearing more outrage, basically, from the government and basically telling the United States not to allow the United States to do what they're doing? What's up with Islamabad?
Well, Islamabad is taking cognizance of this, and if you recall, after the 26/11, that is the attack on the Salalah checkpost by the NATO forces last year, our parliament met and a committee was formed, the Parliamentary Committee on National Security, which proposed to the government, and the parliament has adopted it as a bill that which states very clearly that the drone attacks on Pakistan are illegal, and the government of Pakistan is going to demand, and it has already demanded, that either the drone attacks are stopped or the government of Pakistan's say is taken as an input into it. The chief of the Inter-Services Intelligence, Lieutenant General Zahirul Islam, recently, in fact last week only, visited Washington and Langley and had a very detailed meeting with General Petraeus, his CIA counterpart, and made it very clear to him that the drone attacks are not acceptable to Pakistan. They must stop. Not only that, they are counterproductive, and if anything, they are increasing the militants, because the so-called collateral damage, the relatives of the victims,
but Mr. Hali, without due respect, this is not the first time that Islamabad has said that to Washington. But I want to know, do you think that we will go from actually words and turn it into actions by the Pakistani government to try to put some pressure on the United States? After all, their own nationals are being killed inside of their own country.
Absolutely. The people here are extremely angry, and probably because of the month of Ramadan, there have been limited protests. But after Eid, we expect that more people will come out in the streets. One of the major political parties, the Tehreek-e-Insaf Pakistan, is planning to visit North Waziristan and trying to talk to those people over there, and especially to the victims of the drone attacks. And moreover, if you also recall, after the 26/11 incident I mentioned earlier, General Kiani had given an order. General Kiani is the chief of the army staff, that any drone which is within Pakistan territory will be considered as a breach of our sovereignty and will be shot down. Unfortunately, this action has not been carried out so far, but it stands as a clear threat to the United States.
Okay. Well, Mr. Halliday, under the U.S. administration of Obama, the world has witnessed an expansion of drone strikes. Now, this is actually after the warmongering, or the so-called warmongering presidency of George W. Bush, and now we have the Nobel Peace Laureate that have actually expanded these drone strikes in so many places. Why has that happened, especially under this administration?
Yeah, it's an extraordinary situation where the Nobel Peace Prize winner, as you've pointed out, is now a warmonger and is expanding U.S. aggression into Yemen and Pakistan and elsewhere. And to see the sovereignty of Pakistan violated, I guess, just about every day is just an outrage. I would hope that Pakistan would do more about it, would block all access to Afghanistan by NATO forces and the US. But I'm not an advisor to Pakistan. They have their own reasons, and maybe the Pakistan military is no more careful about human life and civilian life than are the American troops and American forces. But for Mr. Obama to continue this road and to make decisions personally, apparently, in terms of drone strikes and the use of predator drones designed to kill supposedly their opponents, their terrorists, whoever they are, but inevitably kill civilians, is an extraordinary situation. And to see the White House intimately involved in this process of assassination and murder, to me, is deeply offensive and total violation of international law, the UN Charter, and, as I said before, Geneva Conventions, which protect civilians from acts of warfare.
Well, Ty Bear, you're sitting in Washington. What does it mean exactly when we have the so-called president of peace who was going to bring the change, and it has continued to expand as far as with the drone operations? Does it mean that there's really no difference when it comes to certain areas of foreign policy? It doesn't matter if it's a Democrat or Republican who's in the White House in the United States. The policy seems to be extremely hawkish in general.
Absolutely. But before I answer that question, I'd like to tell you that myself, along with 60 other Americans, are going to be taking part with Imran Khan in this historic march to Waziristan in September on International Day of Peace. We will be leaving Islamabad, and on the 23rd, actually, we leave Islamabad. We arrive on the 21st, and we will be going to Waziristan to show our solidarity and to show that the American people do not approve of these drone attacks and the killings of innocent. But getting back to your question, this president is now assassin president. This president has claimed that he has a kill list that he gets together with his own advisors on Terror Tuesday, they call it. They joke about it, that they make a kill list and they decide who is going to live and who's going to die. This is a total affront to the American people who don't really know what their president is up to, or they don't really care. But I prefer to believe, in all my knowledge of the American public, they're not made clear by our media. There seems to be a media blackout as to what this president is doing. And they put up this supposed victory in Libya using drones, as the president never declared war on Libya, and Congress was all in a huff because they said he had to go with them to even use force in Libya. But he said, as long as we're using drones, we're not attacking any country. The international community must get together, like we in the United States, our group, peace-loving people, and say enough is enough. We need to stop these drone attacks. We need to stop the assassination of people overseas, including an American, Anwar al-Awlaki, who was killed, and his 16-year-old son, along with Samir Khan.
Well, you just mentioned one person or two people that were killed, but Mr. Hawley, in general, I mean, this happens regularly, unfortunately. Do you think that it appears that there is a callous reaction to the loss of life in Pakistan by Washington and its allies, as if the lives of a Pakistani or a Somali or an Afghani is less important than an American life?
No, I don't believe there's any callousness towards it. In fact, I am also a columnist, and I've been writing in my columns. There are a number of my colleagues who take this issue up very, very seriously. And if you recall, last year, one of our journalists by the name of Mr. Abdul Karim, whose family, in fact, his own brother and nephew were killed in the as part of the collateral damage in a drone attack, has filed a suit, and he named the then CIA director here. I don't know his real name, but his pseudonym was Jonathan Banks, and he also named then U.S. Secretary of Defense, Mr. Gates, and Leon Panetta, who was the CIA director at that time.
Right.
Jonathan
I mean,
Banks
the callousness from
retreat,
Washington itself, of course, not from the Pakistanis. The callousness as far as how Washington looks at the loss of a Pakistani life.
Yes, this is something which is resented very much, and it has become a political issue, and the opposition parties in Pakistan are pressing the government that they must raise their voice and make it very clear to Washington that unless it stops the killing of the innocent people, no further cooperation will be extended. And I only hope and pray that our government takes it up as a serious issue and enforces the voice of the people of Pakistan upon the U.S. government to be more cognizant of the feelings of the people.
Well, Mr. Halliday, what will it take now to be able to stop these drone attacks? We've talked about the problems in general, and we talk about basically the impotence of the international community. So if Washington is not getting any pressure from the international community, they're not being condemned, what will it take in order to stop it and not have them continue to expand their drone operations in so many countries?
Well, it's sad to say, perhaps, but I believe the American people have got to take responsibility. They are individually responsible under a democratic system for what their government does. And the fact that this war has not been endorsed by Congress, it frankly is no excuse and carries no weight. They have a president in the White House, they have a Congress, so they're supporting it, they're budgeting for warfare. The Pentagon's budget is probably over $1 trillion by now. The damage is well open, easy to be seen. But as our friend in Washington said, the media in this country does not reach the vast majority of Americans. They don't really know what's going on. Or if they do know, they don't want to know the details. But they are responsible. That's a democracy. So I think the American people have got to take action. The UN cannot or will not. It's corrupted itself. The rest of us are not responsible for Mr. Obama. The American people have got to make a decision and change the sort of government that they have, committed to aggression, this jingoistic patriotism, the violence that we've seen for many years now from the United States of America. Got to stop.
Well, thank you so much. We are out of time. Appreciate a very interesting discussion. Thank
Dozens of people have been killed in Pakistan by America's pilotless drones. The U.S. uses the drones not only in Pakistan, but also in countries such as Yemen, Afghanistan, and Somalia.
There is a reckless disregard. There is apparently a reckless disregard for international law in Washington. Washington believes that as long as it is safe, its allies are safe, the rest of the world.
Last year, Barack Obama said U.S. drone strikes are mostly killing militants. For years now, the U.S. has been using its unmanned planes to fire missiles wherever it feels necessary, including in countries that condemn its actions.
I want to make sure that people understand actually drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties. For the most part, they have been very precise, precision strikes against al-Qaeda and their affiliates. And we are very careful.
Thousands of the drone attacks. The reality is that 74% of those killed have been civilians. Who will be held responsible for the innocent lives lost, and what will it take to stop these attacks? Well, stay with us as we take a look at this story on this news analysis.
Evidence shows that the U.S. government has systematically understated the extent of civilian casualties from drone strikes in Pakistan. This by automatically considering any military-aged male killed in drone attacks as a militant. A new study, however, says civilian casualties accounted for 70% of the death toll over a 3-year period, whereas American figures put that number at 30%. The findings are based on information from the families of victims and local sources concerning strikes on mourners and rescue workers. The new revelations stand in stark contrast to what the U.S. president says.
Hello and welcome to Press TV's news analysis coming to you from Tehran. I'm Majorie Cohn. Thanks so much for being with us. Well, they have been very precise precision strikes against Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. This is a quote from U.S. President Barack Obama regarding American drone strikes in Pakistan. However, according to a new report that's gathered its information by talking to people on the ground, relatives of witnesses